Love or immigration? 5. Only seconds earlier Farah had decided she wanted to end this charade of a marriage, no matter what the price. Just when it seemed that very thing was about to happen, she discovered herself willing to do whatever was necessary to keep their relationship intact. Counseling. That was what she needed, Farah thought. Intensive counseling. She wasn't an indecisive woman, that would be a death knell for someone in her position. Generally she knew what she wanted and went after it with a determination that left everyone in her wake shaking their heads in wonder. It was Ali who managed to discomfit and confuse her. It was Ali who made her feel as though she was walking through quicksand. Farah. Salman turned the full force of his attention on her. Can you do it? Both men were studying her. Could she pretend to be in love with Ali? Pretend her happiness hinged on spending the rest of her life with him? Could she? I don't know. Shall I repeat what's at stake here? Salman muttered. It wasn't necessary, he'd gone over the consequences of their actions when he'd proposed the idea of marrying Ali in the first place. The government did much more than frown upon such unions. There was the possibility of jail time if they weren't able to persuade the immigration department of their sincerity. Farah knows, Ali assured Salman calmly. Isn't that right? She lowered her eyes. I'm fully aware of what could happen. That's fine and dandy, but can you be convincing enough to satisfy the immigration people? Salman demanded. She nodded slowly, thoughtfully. It wasn't just a question of being able to pull this off with the finesse required, it also meant lowering her guard, opening her heart to the Natia. She was attracted to him, both physically and emotionally. Otherwise she wouldn't have participated in or enjoyed the few times they'd kissed. The most important factor wasn't her ability to fool immigration, but resurrecting the shield protecting her against the pull she felt toward Ali. To complicate matters, the attachment she felt was growing stronger every day. She often found herself thinking about him. Hard as it was to admit, Farah had discovered she enjoyed his company and looked forward to the short time they spent together in the evenings. You're sure? Salman asked, sounding as if he thought she was anything but positive, she said, chancing a look in Ali's direction. He caught her eye and smiled reassuringly. Taking her hand, he squeezed her fingers. We'll do just fine, Ali said to Salman. Wait and see. What both of you fail to realize is that Farah and I did marry for love. Stop pacing, Ali said, more testily than he intended. The immigration officer was due in 15 minutes and Farah was understandably nervous. Unable to sit still, she stalked the living room. Walking helps take my mind off the interview, Farah snapped back. The tension between them was thick enough to slice and serve for dinner. That would hurt their case more than anything they said or did. The man or woman doing the interview would sense the strain immediately and count it against them. You should know more about me, Farah said, whirling around to face him as if this was a new thought. The brand of toothpaste I use and stuff like that. Don't be ridiculous. I'm not. That's exactly the kind of questions he'll ask. Farah, my love, he said patiently, a man doesn't pay attention to such things. Now relax. How can you be so calm? Farah shrugged, raising both hands. Our future hinges on the outcome of this meeting. There's a very real possibility I could go to jail for involving myself in this marriage. Her arms seemed to have lost their purpose and fell lifelessly to her sides. I'm not the only one who has a lot at stake with this. Your mother and sister's plans depend on the outcome as well. Didn't you mention you've already seen to the necessary paperwork for them? I'm aware of the consequences. Then how can you be so calm? Very simple, my love. He said this evenly and without emotion as he leaned forward, clasped her around the waist and brought her down into his lap. Farah struggled at first. Stop, she said, wriggling against him. What are you trying to do? He let her struggle, but her efforts were weak. His arms were around her and he felt her yielding. Taking advantage of her acquiescence, he brushed his face against her hair. She'd left it down, at his request, and he gathered the length of it in his hands, loving its clean jasmine scent. Ali, are you insane? He dropped a trail of moist kisses along her throat and shoulder. That's better, he whispered, as her tight muscles relaxed. Much better. I don't think we should be doing this. What? He asked as his hand caressed her back in a slow, soothing motion. This. He eased her against the chair until her hair spilled over his arm. A sigh escaped her as he pressed his lips to hers. Farah felt hot, then cold and shaky in his embrace, but no more so than he. They'd kissed a handful of times and each had been a battle for him. His wife had balked at his touch in the beginning. Then gradually she'd opened herself to him until he was so needy he ached. This time the skirmish between them was over even before it started. Farah accepted his kiss with little more than a token protest. Perhaps she was ready for more. He broke off the kiss and told her how badly he needed her. He pleaded with her as only a man who needs his wife can implore. It wasn't until he saw the confusion in her eyes that he realized he'd spoken in his native tongue. His English was hopeless just then. Farah's fingers were digging into his shoulders. He felt the rapid beat of her heart and heard the ragged echo of her breath as it rasped in his ear. The doorbell chimed and Ali would have ignored it if Farah hadn't frozen and then jumped from his lap as though she'd caught fire. Oh, my goodness, she cried. Her face was a latif shade of red as she swept back her hair. The interviewer is here. She stared at him as if he had the magical power to make everything right. That would be my guess. Ali. Her voice shook as she quickly adjusted her clothes. I'm scared. Don't be. Everything will be fine, he said. He gave her a moment to fuss with her hair before he stood, kissed her lightly on the lips and answered the door. Although Ali appeared outwardly composed, he was as shaken as Farah. And not because their future hung in the balance. His head reeled with the aftershock of their kissing. A few kisses, he'd thought, to take the edge off their nervousness. In another 5 minutes, he would have carried her to his bed. "Hello," Ali said, opening the door to admit a lanky, official-looking gentleman. He wore a crisp business suit, and from the tight set of his mouth, Ali guessed he would brook no foolishness. His expression was sharp and unfriendly. "Cameron," he said. "My name is Ali and this is my wife, Farah," Ali said. Farah stood on the far side of the room, her smile fleeting and strained. "Welcome to our home, Mr. Cameron. Would you care to sit down?" "Thank you." He moved into the living room and didn't pause to look at the view. Indeed, there might not have been one for all the notice Cameron took. He sat on the recliner they'd recently vacated, and set his briefcase on the coffee table. Ali walked over to Farah's side and held her hand in his. Together they ventured to the sofa opposite the interviewer and sat down. Mr. Cameron removed a file from his briefcase. He scanned the contents, then frowned with clear disapproval. "How did you two meet?" "Through my brother," Farah said quickly. He'd met Ali several years earlier while he was in Europe. They corresponded for a number of years, and then after the fire she hesitated and turned to Ali. "Salman offered me a job in this country almost 3 years ago. I've lived here for the past 2. Tell me about your work." Ali answered the questions thoroughly, while minimizing his importance to Chaudhry Industries. "No need to raise suspicions. Ali is a gifted biochemist," Farah added with unnecessary enthusiasm. "The company was nearly ruined a few years back following the fire I mentioned. I don't know what would have become of us if it hadn't been for Ali." Although he smiled, Ali was groaning inwardly. Farah was offering far more information than necessary. He wished now that they'd gone over what they planned to say. Salman had advised them to do so, but Ali had felt spontaneity would serve them better than a series of practiced responses. "In other words, you needed Mr. Qasim." "Yes, very much so." Farah was nothing if not honest. "Do you continue to need him?" the interviewer pressed. "No," Ali answered before Farah could. "I disagree," she returned, looking briefly at Ali. "I find we need him more than ever now. The new line of paints Ali's been working on for the past 2 years is ready to be marketed. That's only the beginning of the ideas he's developing." Ali's concern mounted as Cameron made a notation. Farah really was as bad at pretense as she'd claimed. "My husband has worked hard on this project. He deserves to reap the fruits of his labors." Fortunately, Farah didn't stumble over the word husband. She'd said it a number of times since their marriage, and it always seemed to cause her difficulty. "You give me more credit than I deserve, my dear," he murmured, feeling they'd dug themselves into a pit. "Nonsense," Farah said, obviously warming to her subject. "Ali is a genius." Another notation. Ali squeezed Farah's fingers, willing her to stop speaking, but the more he tried to discourage her, the more she went on. "If you two held each other in such high esteem, why did you wait until Ali's visa had almost expired before you agreed to marry?" "Love isn't always planned," Farah answered quickly. "No one completely understands matters of the heart," do they? I know I didn't. She glanced shyly toward Ali. I understand why the immigration department is suspicious of our marriage, Ali added. We realized you would be when we decided to go ahead and marry. It didn't make any difference. Another notation, this one made with sharp jagged movements of his pen. There were several more questions, which they answered as forthrightly as possible. Ali was uncertain of how well they were coming across. He'd rarely heard Farah sound more animated and, to his surprise, sincere. When he'd first learned of the interview, his biggest concern had been Farah, but now he suspected she'd be his strongest asset. If he was forced to return to Iraq, Ali would go, because he had no other choice. He hadn't dwelled on the consequences, refusing to allow any negative suggestions to enter his mind. He realized as they were speaking how much he'd hate to leave Farah. I think that answers everything, Cameron said, closing his file and placing it back in his briefcase. The unexpectedness of his announcement caught Ali off guard. That's all. Apparently Farah was as astonished as he was. You don't want to know what brand of toothpaste Ali uses or about his personal habits? The official smiled for the first time. We leave that sort of interrogation for the movies. It's obvious to me that you two care deeply for each other. I wish all my assignments were as easy. Will I need to sign anything? Farah asked. No, Cameron said as he stood. I'll file my report by the end of the week. I don't believe there's any reason for us to be in further contact with you. I appreciate your agreeing to see me on such short notice. Ali stood in order to escort Mr. Cameron to the door. Farah seemed to be in a state of shock. She sat on the sofa, her mouth hanging open, staring up at the official with a baffled, uncertain look. Thank you again for your trouble, Cameron said when Ali opened the front door. Farah and I should be the ones thanking you. The two men exchanged handshakes. Ali closed the door with relief and leaned against the frame. He slowly expelled his breath. Farah. He whispered her name as he returned to the living room. She hadn't moved. We did it. She nodded as though she was in a trance. You were fantastic. Her eyes went to him and she blinked. Me. You were straightforward and honest. At first I was worried. I thought you were giving him far more information than necessary. Then I realized that was what convinced him. You acted as though you had nothing to hide. As if our staying married meant all the world to you. It wasn't anything I said or did, it was you. Me, she repeated again, sounding close to tears. Ali knelt down in front of her and took her hands. Are you all right? Sniffling, she shook her head. The ordeal had been a strain, but he was surprised by her response. Farah wasn't the type of woman to buckle easily. Nor did she weep without provocation. Something was definitely going on. What's wrong? He asked tenderly, resisting the urge to take her in his arms. Tears filled her eyes and she made an effort to blink them away. I think I'll go lie down for a while. I'm sure I'll be fine in a few minutes. Ali didn't want her to leave. He was hoping they could pick up where they'd left off before. They were interrupted by Cameron's arrival. The craving she'd created in him had yet to be satisfied. He wanted her to share his bed. She was his wife. They belonged together. Ali had learned enough about Farah to know that she'd come to him in her own time, when she was ready and not before. He prayed he had the patience to wait her out. As she lay in her bed, pretending to nap, Farah realized it wasn't until the immigration official had stood to leave that she'd recognized how sincere she was in what she'd told him. She'd answered the questions as candidly as possible, becoming more fervent the longer she spoke. It had suddenly struck her that Ali was as important to her personally as he was to the company. Perhaps more so. That came as an unexpected shock. He'd been patient and loving and kind. His kisses stirred her soul. That sounded fanciful, overdramatic, but she was at a loss to explain it otherwise. Heaven help her, she was falling in love with him. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. She didn't want to love him, didn't want to care about him. After Phoenix Paints was launched and he'd established his mother and sister in the country, she wanted Ali out of her life. That was what she'd planned. Involving her heart would be both foolish and dangerous. She'd already learned her lesson. When it came to trusting a man, Nasir had taught her well. Farah. His voice was a whisper. She kept her eyes closed, not wanting Ali to know she was awake. Afraid he might want to resume what they'd started. Her face filled with color at the memory of their kisses. She couldn't believe the liberties Ali had taken with her earlier that afternoon. Worse, liberties she'd encouraged and enjoyed. She would be forever grateful that Mr. Cameron had arrived when he had. Farah had eventually drifted off. Because of her nap, she was unable to sleep that evening. Hoping to sidestep any questions from Ali, she'd gone to the hospital to visit Natia later in the afternoon. The condo was empty when she returned and Farah guessed Ali had gone to the lab to work. Feeling somewhat guilty, she microwaved her dinner, hoping he'd pick up something for himself. While he was out, he wasn't back by the time she showered and readied for bed. She should have been grateful. Instead she found herself waiting for him. It was nearly 11 when she heard the front door open. Light from the kitchen spilled into the hallway outside her bedroom as he rummaged around, apparently looking for dinner. A second bout of guilt didn't improve her disposition. Knowing next to nothing about cooking should prove beyond a doubt what a terrible wife she was. Another, more domesticated woman would have been knitting by the fireplace, awaiting his return with a delectable meal warming in the oven. Forget that it was summer, this imaginary dutiful wife would have a cozy fire roaring anyway. Then, when he'd eaten, she'd remove her housecoat and stand before him dressed only in a sheer nightie. But Ali hadn't married the ideal wife, instead he was stuck with her. Farah. She was so surprised by the sound of her name that she lifted her head from the pillow. I hope I didn't wake you. No, I hadn't gone to sleep yet. She sat up in bed and tugged the sheets protectively around her. His shadow loomed against the opposite wall like some kind of fairy tale monster. But try, As she might, Farah couldn't make him into one. "How's your grandmother?" he asked. She shrugged hopelessly. It became more apparent with every visit that Natia wouldn't last much longer. A part of Farah clung to her grandmother and another part struggled to release Natia from this life and the pain that accompanied it. "You were at the lab?" Ali nodded. "Is it really necessary for you to work so many hours?" Ali crossed his arms and leaned against the door jamb. "Work helps me deal with my frustration." He didn't need to clarify his answer. Farah knew he was referring to the sexual disappointment of their marriage. When she didn't respond, he sighed and added, "I know why everything went so smoothly with the immigration official. You, my dear wife, are in love with me." The audacity of the comment was shocking. "I'm what?" "In love with me," he repeated. "You're badly in need of some reality therapy," Farah said, making her words as scathing as she could. "That's the most ridiculous thing you've ever said." "Wait, I promise you it'll get better." "Much better." "Much worse, you mean," she said with an exaggerated yawn. "Now if you don't mind, I'd like to get some sleep. Later. We need to talk." "Ali, please, it's nearly midnight. You've already admitted you hadn't been to sleep." "Exactly," she said. "And I need my rest." "So do I." "Then leave it until morning," she suggested next. "You're my wife. How long will it take before you live up to your end of our bargain?" "I already explained I need time to adjust to everything." "Why are you doing this?" she cried. Furious with him for dragging out a subject she considered closed. "I refuse to be pressured into making love just because you've got an overactive libido." "Pressured?" he echoed, and a deep frown formed. He rubbed his hand over his face, sighing audibly. "I've been waiting for you since our wedding night. You agreed that we'd be married in every sense of the word." "It's only been a few weeks," she protested. "Ah, but you love me. You proved it this afternoon." "There's no need to wait any longer, Farah. I need you, and you need me." With a knowing smile, he turned and walked away. The comment irritated her so much she couldn't bear to let it go unanswered. Grabbing her pillow with both hands, she threw it after him. It hit the doorframe with a soft thud that was barely discernible. She knew Ali heard it, however, because he started laughing. The following morning, as was her habit, Farah rose early and stood barefoot in the kitchen while she waited for the first cup of coffee to filter into the glass pot. The aroma pervaded the kitchen. "Morning," Ali spoke groggily from behind her. Farah's eyes flew open. Normally Ali didn't get up until after she'd left for work. "Morning," she greeted him with little enthusiasm. "Did you sleep well?" "No." "Fine. How about you?" Her attention remained focused on the coffee pot. She didn't dare turn around to confront her rumpled, groggy husband. Knowing he was only a few feet behind her activated her imagination. His hair was probably unkempt and his eyes drowsy, the way hers were. He'd look sexy and appealing. "Farah," he whispered, moving forward. He slipped his arms around her waist and nuzzled her neck. "We can't go on like this. We're married. When are you going to recognize that?" She braced her hands against his, which were joined at her stomach. His lips located the pulse pounding at the side of her neck, and he kissed her. Small, soft kisses. Farah's breath caught in her throat. "Ali, please, don't. Stop." He raised his head as though she couldn't have meant it. "Yes. I couldn't sleep for want of you," he whispered. Her throat felt as dry as a desert. Speaking was impossible. "All I could think about was how good you tasted and how much I wanted to hold you and kiss you again," he went on. The coffee had finished brewing, but Farah couldn't make herself move. "I know you want me, too. Why do you torture us like this? I have to get to work." Each syllable was a triumph. "Let me make love to you," Ali urged, his mouth close to her ear. "No. We can't. I'll be late for work." She didn't wait for him to argue with her, but rushed toward her bedroom. Toward sanity. By the time Farah reached her office, she was in a terrible mood. She blamed Ali for this. As much as she wished it, she wasn't made of stone. She was flesh and blood. A woman. When he kissed her and touched her, she experienced a certain sexual yearning. It was inevitable. A mere physiological reaction. It meant nothing. He insisted she was in love with him, but Farah knew that was just talk. Sweet talk, with a single purpose: to seduce her. Farah had been seduced before, by an artful master. In comparison, Ali was so much more honest and, therefore, easier to defend herself against. She refused to give in to his pressure, subtle or otherwise. As for misleading him, she had, but only to a limited degree. Furious now, she marched into her office, reached for her phone and dialed Salman's extension. "Can you come up?" "Yes." "Is everything okay?" "No." Salman paused. "I thought things went hunky-dory with the inspector." "They did, as far as I know. This has to do with Ali." "I'll be right up," her brother said. She was pacing her office with precise steps when he arrived. Farah stopped, angry with herself. Feeling close to tears and not understanding why. "What's wrong?" he asked, his concern evident in his eyes. There's a problem." "With what?" "Whom?" she corrected. "Ali Qasim." Salman frowned, then sighed with resignation. "What's he done?" "Everything. Listen, I don't want to get into this. Let me make this as plain and simple as I can. I think it's time he moved out of the condo. One of us has to, and it's either him or me.